Hello. Today, I will tell you a simple but meaningful story about an empty chair in a church, a place that contains memories, faith, and the silent presence of God. Join me on that journey to find a little peace and light in your soul. Sunday morning. It was foggy. Thin wisps of smoke drifted over the roof like lingering souls on earth. Mary sat alone by the window, holding a cup of warm tea. Her little house was at the end of a quiet street where rows of ferns hung their shadows over the old fence. She was used to the silence that had lasted since Frank left this world. They had lived here together for nearly 40 years. Every Sunday morning, he would put on his gray sweater, take his felt hat from the door, and turn to ask, "Have you made the tea? Then we'll go to church." But 5 years had passed, and that question had not sounded anymore. Mary stopped. In that moment, amid the morning mist, she heard something very fragile. The church bell. It echoed across the hill, through the foliage, into her heart like a distant call. It wasn't the first bell she'd ever heard, but this morning, it was different. She got up. She didn't know why. She hadn't prepared herself. No mirror, no makeup, just put on her wool coat, grabbed her purse, opened the door, and left. Her feet were slow on the wet ground, but her steps were light. The little white church stood in the middle of the village square. She knew every tile, every pew, every wooden statue. But now, stepping through that wooden door, her heart sank. It was crowded inside. Hymns were playing, people were standing. She didn't want anyone to notice, so she quietly turned to the side, looking for the last cue, the old familiar spot. And then she saw it. That wooden pew. The pew they'd sat in every year. The one to Frank's left, to her right. It was still there now, but empty. Mary sat down, her hand resting lightly on the seat beside her. Cold, smooth, and so familiar. She closed her eyes, not to pray, but to hold on to something fading from her memory. The pastor's voice began to echo, but to Mary, everything was a blur. There was only the sigh, the slow beat of her heart, and the empty chair, silence beside her. Mary sat there, motionless. The sermon continued, the old minister's voice drifting down from the wooden platform in front of her, like a trickle of water running through a crevice in the rocks, even, gentle. But Mary didn't hear the words. Instead, she heard the old sounds, Frank's deep laugh when he tried to keep a straight face but couldn't help but laugh whenever someone in the church sang out of tune. She remembered the way he tapped her leg with his knee as they read the Bible together, the small touch that said, "Stay awake, old lady." And then, deeper, Mary remembered the first day they sat in that pew, a Sunday in 1973. They've been married just 2 weeks, and they'd been hanging around in their wedding clothes as if they were afraid the joy would be lost if they stopped dressing nicely. Frank looked around, then said, "I like the back seat, so if anyone needs to go out early, we don't bother them." But they were the ones who stayed the longest, always the last to stand up, hand in hand, walking out of the church as if they didn't want to leave. Mary smiled softly at the memory, a smile mixed with a pang of pain. This chair had witnessed them getting younger, getting older, and then parting. For decades, the chair had been there. Only the person sitting there had changed. Suddenly, she felt a light breeze. The church was so closed, there couldn't be any wind. But she felt a shiver down her spine. It wasn't cold. It was a very strange feeling, as if someone had just sat down next to her, very lightly, very softly. Mary opened her eyes. The chair was still empty. But her hand was still there. And for a moment, she felt like she wasn't alone. She took a deep breath. It wasn't the scent of the candles. It wasn't the smell of old wood. It was the smell of years of love that still lingered somewhere in the air. A person above turned and smiled at her. His eyes were warm, not questioning, not curious, just a smile of gratitude for her presence. How long had it been since she had smiled back at anyone in church? How long had she let her heart soften to the words of the song? The organ played the final hymn. The congregation stood. Mary stood too, slowly, and for the first time in 5 years, she sang softly along to the song. May the Father be with you always. When everyone left, she lingered, still sitting there, her hand on the chair beside her. Not to hold on to the past, but to wait for something that she couldn't name. Then, something unexpected happened. From the end of the front row, a tiny girl ran over. Curly hair, wearing a pink wool dress, holding a folded piece of paper. The little girl stopped in front of Mary, held out the paper, and whispered, "I saw you sitting alone. This is for you." Mary was stunned. Before she could say anything, the little girl ran away. No one noticed. No one stopped her. No one called her name. Mary opened the paper. Inside was a drawing in colored pencils, scribbled, childish. There were 2 wooden chairs. An old woman was sitting, and next to her was a little angel with a halo on her head and white wings, holding her hand. Under the drawing, in crooked handwriting, were the words, "You are not sitting alone. God is sitting next to you." Mary hugged the paper to her chest. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in all those years, she cried silently. Mary returned home in the pale afternoon, still clutching the drawing. The paper was soft from the shaking in her hand. Even though she had folded it carefully, the pencil ink still clung to the edge of her coat, as if the child had left not just a gift, but a mark. She placed it on the wooden table in the kitchen, next to the vase of dried flowers, and sat down. In front of her was an old wall clock. With each tick, she thought of that moment, the moment the child had looked at her with clear eyes, then disappeared like the wind. Mary poured tea, but this time she added another cup. Not because Frank would return, but because something inside her had shifted, as if the invisible world had shifted a little to reach her heart. That evening, Mary took the drawing and placed it in the middle of Frank's old Bible. The page turned to the passage he read most often. "I will not leave you as an orphan. I will come to you." John 14:18. The old prayer, but this time it seemed to be speaking to her. A week passed. Mary no longer avoided church as she had before. Instead of looking at her watch every Sunday morning and deciding, well, next week, she now had her coat ready on Saturday night. Tea was ready early, and the old wool scarf, the one Frank had knitted, was brought out again. The church was as peaceful as ever, and the seat in the back row was still empty, but this time not alone. Mary sat down, ritually, quietly, slowly, and waited. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for: the child, a conversation, a sign, or just the feeling of being seen, of knowing that she was still present in someone's eyes. The sermon that day was about faithfulness, about God still being there even when people no longer believe. Mary listened to every word as if each sentence had been written just for her. When the service ended, she lingered as she had the last time. A few people came to say hello. Some recognized her as Frank's wife. They had been an inseparable couple in previous years. Mary just smiled and nodded, didn't say much. When the church was empty, she turned back to her seat, hoping to see the curly-haired child again with the pink dress and the clear eyes. But no one. Mary asked a few people, the minister, a few older women, the doorman. No one remembered seeing a child like that. The curly-haired child, the pink dress? No, I don't think any children are wearing anything like that today. Mary began to panic. The drawing was still there, proof that it was true. But if no one saw, who was she? That afternoon, Mary sat in the living room, looking out at the leafy backyard. The wind blew through the open window, carrying with it the sweet scent of the earth. On the table, she spread out the drawing again. Slowly, as if reading a letter from heaven. The image of two chairs, her and an angel, simple, clumsy, but containing something sacred that could not be named. Mary touched the crooked words, "God is sitting next to you." Tears fell slowly, not because of sadness, but because for the first time in 5 long years, she felt seen. Not by the eyes of the world, but by the eyes of the one who loves, silent but always present. Mary said softly, like a whisper into the air, "If it is a real angel, please come back just one more time." And that night, she left the window open, as if waiting for a small miracle. Another week passed. Sunday morning, it was raining lightly. The small drops of water fell on the glass like fingers tapping gently, like someone waking up from a distant world. Mary sat in front of the mirror, pinning an old hairpin in her hair. This hairpin was bought by Frank for her 30th wedding anniversary. The silver had faded over the years, but every time she pinned it on, she felt younger, just a little, enough to leave the house. Today, she didn't just go to church. She carried a hope that she would see the girl again. The girl had opened something in her heart. Not exactly joy, not exactly sadness, but a gentle stirring, very much like a whisper from God. Entering the church, Mary looked around. No one looked like the curly-haired child. No pink dress, no familiar eyes. She walked to the last pew, the same pew. There was still an empty seat beside her. But this time, Mary placed a small folded piece of paper on the empty chair. It was just a single line. "Thank you. I received your gift, Mary." She didn't know who would read it. She wasn't sure if anyone would see it, but she placed it down as a way of saying something back. It was as if, deep down, she was talking to an invisible guest, maybe an angel, maybe a random child, or maybe God Himself, incarnated in that small form. After the service, Mary sat longer than usual. The rain outside had stopped. Thin sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows. And then, a voice behind her said, "Grandma, this is for you." Mary turned around. It wasn't the curly-haired girl. It was a boy, about 8 or 9 years old, holding a cream-colored envelope. His eyes were shy but sincere. "I don't know why, but this morning I dreamed about you. Someone told me to draw you something." Mary took the letter. Before she could ask, the boy ran to his mother, who was waiting at the church door. She opened the envelope. Inside was a card folded in half on art paper. And this time, not a picture of 2 chairs, but a large hand holding a small hand. And above it, in bolder letters, "Even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I am with you." Psalm 23:4. Mary sat still. The wind blew softly again. She didn't know where it came from, but she felt her heart soften, as if someone were walking beside her. Not a shape, not a voice, just a presence. Quietly, she whispered, "God's messengers are children with fearless eyes." And she knew, from now on, the empty chair would no longer be a seat for loneliness. It would be a seat reserved for things that cannot be seen, but are always real. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mary was watering the flower beds in the backyard, the flowers Frank had tended, and she continued to keep them as a promise to him. A breeze blew, and a small object fell from the old mailbox in the wooden fence. She approached. It was not a bill, not an advertisement, but a handwritten envelope, slightly yellowed paper. No address, no stamp, just a neat handwritten note. For the woman in the last row. Her heart slowed a beat. Mary took the envelope into the house, set it on the table, and made a pot of tea. The gesture was slow, almost solemn, as if she knew that what was inside was not just a piece of paper, but something that would change her. Inside the envelope was a small card, painted in watercolors. There was no clear design, just a simple wooden chair set in a meadow, the sunset in the distance. On the back, a line. People think they are sitting alone, but that is where God chooses to sit with them. Mary touched the paper. Her eyes were blurred, not because of old age, but because her heart was beating a very real, very alive rhythm. She wondered, who sent it? The girl, the boy, or someone in the church? Or was God using the simplest souls to send her messages? That evening, Mary sat alone in the quiet room. No TV, no radio, just the sound of the wind and her heart. She took all the little things, her first drawing, the handwritten letter, this afternoon's card, and lined them up on the wooden table. Each one was small, too small for anyone else to notice, but to her, it was a series of whispers from God. Part of her began to believe. The empty seat in the last row is not a place for absence. It is where God left his footprints. The following Sunday, Mary arrived earlier than usual. This time, she did not sit quietly with her head bowed. She brought a small flower, which she placed on the empty seat. Not for anyone, not expecting anyone to pick it up, just as a reply. I know, I saw, and thank you. An older woman sitting nearby saw it. When the service ended, something strange happened. A toddler walked to the back of the row, plopped down in the seat next to Mary. He said nothing, just sat still and smiled at her, a smile full of light. She turned to her. "Who are you with?" But the child did not answer. A moment later, his mother came to pick him up. "I insist on sitting next to this seat, Auntie. It's strange." Mary smiled. It wasn't strange, because she understood something. God was still calling her through little souls in unexpected ways. And the empty seat had never really been empty. That night, the sky was clear. It was rare for a night to be cloudless, fogless, and the sky to be so wide open. Each star was like a small eye from heaven looking down. Mary covered herself with a light towel, brought a cup of warm tea, and walked out onto the back porch. There was an old wooden chair that Frank had made. For years, it had been lying there, alone, no one sitting on it. Another chair was empty. She sat down next to it, as if sitting with an old friend. The wind gently blew through her silver hair. There was no sound of cars, no sound of clocks, just a silence that the human heart could only sometimes touch. Mary closed her eyes, and in that moment, memories returned, not in a rush, but very lightly, like pieces of cloth embroidered by the thread of time. Frank smiled in the sunlight. The laughter of children echoed through the backyard. On Sunday afternoons, the whole family held hands and prayed together. And the lonely nights when Mary cried without knowing why. She opened her eyes. In the empty chair beside her, there was no one. But she knew there was a presence. Not the old man's, not the child's anymore. It was God. No form, no words, just a covering, as if the whole night sky was listening to her breathing. Mary put her skinny hands on the wooden chair. If God were sitting here, what would I say? She wondered. Then she began to speak. No sermon, no prayer, no crying, just a whisper. I'm afraid of oblivion. I'm afraid of sitting alone forever. I'm afraid that one day no one will remember Frank. No one will remember my empty chair. The wind blew, carrying a strange scent, the smell of old wood, of letters, and of jasmine. Mary smiled. But I believe too. I believe that every empty chair has someone chosen to sit in it, at the right time, on the right day. And if I live many more seasons, I will keep that seat, not for sadness, not for regret, but for little encounters where you can come in. That night, Mary had no dreams. But when she awoke, the morning light was streaming through the window in an unusual way, as if her bed had been placed between two worlds, one present, one unseen. And out on the porch, the chair was still there, empty. But empty in a beautiful way, empty as an invitation. It is the story of the empty chair in the last row, a chair that is not just empty in form, but also filled with hope and promise from faith. Have you ever felt that silent presence in your life? Share your thoughts and stories below so that together we can cultivate faith and hope every day.